Big day for a small stock with nuclear aspirations. George Tillis, our senior markets correspondent, taking a look at NANO Nuclear, ticker NNE, our overlooked stock of the day. George up 19% on admission into the prestigious Russel 3000, which is not even a small cap index.
It's a big day, OJ.
But a market seems
small
to think
cap
it's a big
index.
day.
That's right. Well, look, I mean, obviously, if you look at the last year, I mean, the stock IPO'd back in May, actually the first week of May. It traded from $5 close to 38 or so dollars. It was actually a really monumental speculative trade, you know, going back, like I said, a couple months ago or a few months ago. But nonetheless, I think the technology is quite compelling and interesting. They're effectively a nuclear reactor technology company. Their specialty is actually small SMRs, they call them small modular reactors, which are essentially transportable nuclear reactors, which do have some value to provide energy in remote areas. Areas, for instance, where you need some industrial power, but you don't have access to, you know, hydrocarbon energy or even transmission lines. The other thing is they seem to be focused also on industrial desalination, utility scale kinds of reactors as well. And they're not just here trying to sell in the United States. They've actually got a lot of African nations, potential customers. And effectively, this is an interesting technology that is not necessarily new. We know that small-scale nuclear reactors already exist in areas like, for instance, research in universities, submarines, and also aircraft carriers use the same technology. Not necessarily the utility scale that, of course, mega reactors have from a utility standpoint, but nonetheless, I think this is an interesting and novel company that has a lot of promise in the future under many assumptions, though, because you have to consider it's not the technology that can be deployed. We know that nuclear fission is viable. It happens. We can control it from a scientific and, of course, mathematical standpoint. The challenge is safety and effectively how does enriched uranium stay out of the hands of, you know, terrorists and all of the nefarious organizations which want to get their hands on it.
Well, they are certainly building them out at fairly rapid speed in other major economies around the world. Middle East, pretty big. Dubai, pretty good for SMRs.
Yeah.
They're trying to really diversify out of their oil independence. So we do see a good bit of nuclear reactors being built in the Mideast. China, too, is cranking them out as well. They're not afraid of the nuclear power either. So it seems like there's a lot of things that suggest that the U.S. will ultimately get there, but maybe if we don't need to, if we're still pumping a ton of crude, more than we ever expected, maybe the rush isn't quite there anymore?
Well, that's the thing. I think, you know, the biggest barrier to this technology is obviously, you know, the externalities associated with what you do with the waste. That's always been the problem for nuclear energy. I think density of power availability in specific areas may be here in the United States, considering we're a developed economy. There's a lot of energy infrastructure already in place. So I think in remote areas where they're actually leapfrogging, you know, infrastructure, you know, for instance, in Africa, they moved from not having telephones at all to actually cell phones. So they actually jumped technologies. And this may be the case for other remote areas where they don't have the you know, oil and gas infrastructure to supply their energy needs. So they may end up jumping towards these smaller scale you know, modular reactors that companies like NANO Nuclear are developing. So I think there's a lot of promise in this area. The challenge is how do you, from an international standpoint, regulate the enriched uranium that goes into these small scale reactors, which again, you know, are highly volatile, but also can get in the hands of folks that have nefarious uses for this kinds of technology. So I think this is interesting. But I will stress this, you know, the company itself as a business hasn't generated revenue. So that's an important thing to consider. And until it does, you have to consider that the risk involved in an investment like this is, you know, the promise of delivering technologies to the marketplace, you know, years ahead, not necessarily anytime soon.
Okay. All right, so it's still a pretty far look in the future, operating at a loss, but at least
Correct.
enough momentum, at least enough market cap. We've talked with the team at Lightbridge before, which is an even smaller company, so there is some notability to the Russell 3000, recognizing some of the potential growth here, it seems like. Good one to keep an eye on, George. NANO Nuclear. All right, thanks for the introduction. NNE, first time featured on Overlooked. Would love to talk with the CEO. Maybe we'll see if we can get him on here. Thanks, George.